On the afternoon of March 15, 2022, at around 1 p.m., Bob Harper made a horrifying discovery. As he walked into their bedroom, he found his wife, Sandra, lying naked and lifeless on the bed. Sandra had been strangled with her own panties. Bob's heart pounded and his hand shook as he reached for his phone to call 911. The 911 operator answered quickly, and Bob's voice trembled as he reported the incident. "My wife, she's not breathing. I think she's dead," he stammered. His voice was filled with disbelief and terror. The operator stayed on the line, asking questions to keep him calm and gather information while dispatching emergency services to their home. Within minutes, paramedics arrived at the Harper residence. The sound of sirens filled the usually quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Drive. Paramedics rushed inside, their faces serious and focused. Inside the bedroom, the paramedics confirmed the worst. Sandra was dead. Sandra Harper was a 41-year-old school teacher who lived in Savannah, Georgia. She was known for her kindness and dedication to her students at Ellis Elementary School. Sandra lived in a big, beautiful house on Ardsley Park with her husband, Bob Harper. She graduated from the University of Georgia with a degree in education and had been teaching for almost 20 years. Sandra loved being involved in her community. She was an active member of her church, where she volunteered for various events and programs. Sandra was also part of a local book club, which met every Thursday evening. She enjoyed reading mystery novels, especially those by Agatha Christie. Sandra had a close-knit family. Her parents, James and Margaret Collins, lived nearby and visited often. Sandra and Bob did not have children, but they were very close to their niece, Jenny, who lived in the same neighborhood. Sandra's personality was warm and inviting. Her colleagues and friends often described her as a beacon of positivity. She was always ready to lend a helping hand or offer a listening ear. In the days before her death, Sandra was looking forward to a weekend getaway with Bob to Tybee Island. She had organized this surprise trip to celebrate their 17th wedding anniversary, hoping it would rekindle their relationship, which had been strained recently. Her last few days were filled with joy and anticipation, unaware of the tragic turn her life would soon take. The police arrived promptly, led by Detective Linda Martinez and her partner, Detective John Harris. Detective Martinez was known for her meticulous attention to detail, while Detective Harris had a reputation for his intuitive grasp of human behavior. They began their investigation immediately. Detective Harris guided Bob Harper away from the chaotic scene inside. Harris asked Bob to sit on the porch and start questioning him about his whereabouts during the night of the murder. He claimed he was out of town on a business trip. Bob repeated his account of finding Sandra upon his return and calling 911, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't understand who would want to harm his wife. His confusion and grief were evident as he spoke. While Detective Harris questioned Bob Harper, Detective Martinez swiftly evaluated the crime scene, her expression growing grim as she examined the disordered bedroom. 2 fluted glasses lay on the floor, an unopened champagne bottle sat by the dresser, and a bucket of melted ice was nearby. A satin nightgown was draped over a lamp on the nightstand. The bed covers were tossed aside, and the bed sheets were untucked. Sandra's naked body was on the bed, her panties tied around her neck, her face bearing the marks of a violent struggle. The scene was both heartbreaking and disturbing. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Sandra knew her attacker. Had a romantic encounter turned violent? The autopsy would reveal more answers. The detectives were thorough, making sure not to miss any detail that might explain what had happened. Detective Martinez immediately began collecting evidence. She carefully took fingerprints from various surfaces in the room, hoping to find a match in the police database. Detective Harris, meanwhile, focused on taking detailed photographs of the scene, ensuring that every piece of evidence was documented. The detectives found the panties used as the murder weapon and carefully bagged them for further analysis. They also collected DNA samples from under Sandra's fingernails, indicating she might have scratched her attacker in an attempt to defend herself. Outside, the forensic team arrived and began their work. They used a special light to look for any bodily fluids that might provide additional clues. They also collected hair samples and fibers from the bed and surrounding area. Every piece of evidence was crucial in piecing together the events leading up to Sandra's tragic death. Neighbors started to gather outside, whispering to each other and looking towards the Harper house with concern. People who knew Sandra were in disbelief, unable to comprehend that something so horrific could happen to someone so kind and loving. As the afternoon progressed, Detectives Martinez and Harris continued their investigation. The detectives remained focused to uncover the truth and find out who was responsible for this brutal crime. They knew that solving Sandra's murder required a thorough and methodical approach. They worked tirelessly, driven by the need to bring justice for Sandra and her grieving family. The first person summoned to the police station for questioning in Sandra's murder was her husband, Bob Harper. At 43, Bob was a successful real estate businessman in Savannah, Georgia. Known for his outgoing and charming personality, he was often described as a social butterfly. He could be vain and somewhat self-absorbed, always concerned with maintaining his handsome and youthful appearance. Despite these traits, he was ambitious and well-respected in his field. Detectives Martinez and Harris conducted the interrogation. Bob was questioned about his whereabouts on the night of Sandra's murder. He claimed he was out of town on a business trip, inspecting properties. They asked Bob to provide details about his trip. Bob explained he had left town the previous morning and stayed overnight in Atlanta. He provided hotel receipts and emails to support his alibi. Bob's eagerness to establish his alibi made the detectives wonder if he was hiding something. This seemed like a solid alibi at first, but something about Bob's demeanor made the detectives suspicious. While he was cooperative and answered all questions, he seemed overly eager to clear his name, repeatedly insisting on his innocence without prompting. The detectives noted his frequent glances at his watch and the way his hands fidgeted as he spoke. It was unusual for someone to be so focused on proving their innocence, especially when grieving a loved one. They decided to investigate further and look into Bob's activities in more detail. The detectives began their investigation by reviewing security footage from the hotel in Atlanta where Bob claimed he was staying. The footage showed Bob checking in on the afternoon of March 14, 2022. About an hour later, a person wearing a hoodie and large sunglasses was seen entering his room. This disguised individual stayed with Bob until late in the evening. Around 10 p.m., the person in the hoodie left the room, followed by Bob a few minutes later. They were then observed kissing in the parking lot before driving off in separate cars in opposite directions. This was peculiar because Bob did not return to his hotel room until early the next morning. So, where did he go if he didn't follow the person in the hoodie? The detectives continued to investigate, wanting to know more about the mysterious person in the hoodie. As they reviewed earlier footage, they discovered that the person in the hoodie was a young blonde woman. The questions remained: who was she? What was her relationship with Bob? And could she be connected to Sandra's murder? Furthermore, the detectives checked Bob's work records. They found out that Bob had canceled his scheduled business activities for March 14th and 15th. This contradicted his alibi, making it clear that Bob had lied about the purpose of his trip. Bob's behavior and the new information made him the prime suspect in Sandra's murder. The police needed more evidence, but it was becoming clear that Bob was hiding something important. The investigation was far from over, and the detectives were determined to find the truth about what happened to Sandra. This combination of suspicious behavior, a mysterious girlfriend, and discrepancies in Bob's story kept the detectives on high alert. As they continued their investigation, they hoped to uncover more details that would lead them to Sandra's killer. The second suspect in Sandra's murder was Carol Morgan, the blonde woman seen with Bob in the hotel video. Carol is a striking 24-year-old personal trainer known for her seductive demeanor and dedication to fitness. She was highly popular among male clients and had a reputation for getting too close to married men, sparking some gossip in the community. Both Bob and Sandra had known Carol for a while. Bob had hired Carol as his personal trainer, and she often visited their house for training sessions. Because of this, Carol was a familiar presence in Bob and Sandra's lives. Detectives Martinez and Harris decided to question Carol. They wanted to find out more about her relationship with Bob and any possible connection to Sandra's murder. When they brought Carol in for questioning, she seemed confident and cooperative. She answered their questions about her relationship with Bob. As the interrogation continued, the detectives began to uncover more about Carol's relationship with Bob. It came to light that Bob and Carol were having an affair. Carol remained unflustered when she admitted to the affair, but denied any involvement in Sandra's murder. Her calm demeanor and lack of emotion struck the detectives as unusual. Carol's affair with Bob added a new layer to the investigation. The detectives asked Carol if she knew about Sandra's murder, or if she had been involved in any way. Carol denied any involvement, insisting that she had nothing to do with Sandra's death. She claimed that her relationship with Bob was purely for fun and had nothing to do with any crime. The detectives were not entirely convinced by Carol's story. They decided to look deeper into her background and her activities around the time of Sandra's murder. They wanted to see if there were any clues that might link Carol to the crime. The detectives followed up on Carol's alibi by interviewing her friends. They confirmed that Carol was indeed with them on the night of the murder, but something about the consistency of their stories seemed rehearsed. The detectives noted this and obtained Bob and Carol's phone records and discovered multiple calls between them over the past months. This suggested they were in regular contact, and it didn't look good for both Bob and Carol. As the investigation progressed, both Bob and Carol remained persons of interest. Bob's suspicious eagerness and Carol's too-perfect composure left the detectives with more questions than answers. The complex relationships and potential motives added layers to the case, making it clear that solving Sandra's murder would require thorough and careful investigation. On March 18, 2022, 3 days after Sandra's body was found, a significant piece of evidence surfaced. Detective Martinez discovered a series of emails between Bob and Carol. These emails detailed their affair and included discussions about Sandra. While the emails did not explicitly mention a plan to harm Sandra, they contained suspicious hints that suggested otherwise. "I think about your young, tight body all the time," Bob wrote to Carol. "I can't wait for the time when you and I can be together every night," Bob added. "Sandra is definitely way past her prime." The emails were found on Bob's laptop, which the detectives had seized as part of their investigation. Detective Martinez carefully reviewed each message. One email from Carol read, "You can have my body every minute of the day, but you need to do something about Sandra first." And another from Bob mentioned, "I'll handle it soon." These cryptic messages were enough to raise alarm bells for the detectives. In addition to the emails, the detectives uncovered surveillance footage from a nearby park. The footage showed Carol meeting with another man on the evening of March 12th, just days before Sandra's murder. This man was later identified as Alan Wilson, a 23-year-old computer specialist who was known for his quiet demeanor and intelligence. Alan was a regular at the local chess club and often worked late hours on complex computer projects. The footage showed Carol and Alan engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation, their body language suggesting the meeting was significant. At one point, they were seen passing a small item between them, which the detectives speculated could be crucial evidence linked to the crime. Just as Carol was about to leave, Alan stopped her, and they shared a prolonged kiss, indicating a deeper connection between them. This new evidence suggested a deeper conspiracy involving more than just Bob and Carol. Detectives Martinez and Detective Harris decided to bring Alan Wilson in for questioning. They were now looking at the possibility that Alan was involved in the planning or execution of the murder. The detectives also continued to analyze the digital evidence from Bob's laptop, hoping to find more clues that could connect the dots. The discovery of these emails and the surveillance footage added a new layer of complexity to the case. It was becoming clear that Sandra's murder was not a simple crime of passion, but a calculated act involving multiple people. The detectives were determined to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy and bring everyone involved to justice. As the investigation progressed, the community of Savannah remained on edge. The detectives worked tirelessly, knowing that solving this case would require piecing together every fragment of evidence they could find. Alan Wilson, a 23-year-old computer specialist, was brought in for questioning. During the interrogation, detectives Martinez and Harris found Alan to be calm but evasive. He provided vague answers about his relationship with Carol Morgan and his involvement with Bob Harper. When asked about his meeting with Carol on the evening of March 12th, Alan claimed they were discussing a work-related project. However, his explanation lacked specifics and raised further suspicion. The detectives pressed Alan for more details, but he remained composed and offered little additional information. His evasiveness made the detectives more determined to uncover the truth. They decided to dig deeper into Alan's digital activities, hoping to find concrete evidence of his involvement in the murder plot. The investigation reached a breakthrough when forensic analysis traced the digital trail of Alan's hacking activities back to him. They discovered that Alan had used his computer skills to hack into Bob's financial records. Detectives Martinez and Harris confronted Alan with this evidence. They presented him with records of the unauthorized access to Bob's bank accounts. Alan's calm demeanor began to crack under the pressure of the mounting evidence. Alan admitted to accessing Bob's accounts. At first, Alan refused to reveal that Carol had manipulated him into hacking Bob's financial records. He was hesitant and scared, but the detectives pressed him for more information. When the detectives informed Alan that Bob and Carol were having a sexual relationship, Alan finally broke down and confessed. Alan confessed that Carol seduced him by sleeping with him and manipulated him into hacking Bob's bank accounts with the promise of more sex. He said he had no idea that Carol was also having sex with Bob. Alan felt betrayed and angry when he found out the truth. Alan explained that Carol had told him she planned to extort money from Bob, claiming it was rightfully hers and that she worked hard for it. Whenever Alan asked her to clarify, she would always change the subject. Alan asserted that Carol never mentioned harming anyone and insisted he was unaware of any plan to murder Sandra. He expressed shock and devastation upon learning about her death. The detectives listened carefully to Alan's story. They needed to determine if he was telling the truth or if he was more involved than he admitted. Alan maintained his innocence regarding the murder, insisting he had no idea who killed Sandra. He seemed genuinely upset about being manipulated by Carol. The detectives needed to gather more evidence and verify his story. Alan's confession about hacking Bob's accounts and being manipulated by Carol added another layer to the investigation. It showed that Carol was willing to go to great lengths to get what she wanted, even if it meant using someone like Alan. As the investigation moved forward, the detectives had to consider all possibilities. They needed to piece together the truth about Sandra's murder. Alan's involvement in the hacking scheme was clear, but his role in the murder was still uncertain. The detectives continued to piece together the puzzle, determined to bring all the responsible to justice. As the investigation unfolded, the community followed the developments closely. It became evident that Bob killed his wife Sandra under Carol's manipulation. Carol used promises and cunning arguments to persuade Bob, convincing him that they could only be together if Sandra was out of the picture. She argued against divorce, warning it would ruin his career and social standing, and emphasized that divorce would mean sharing his wealth with Sandra. Carol knew Bob valued his wealth and status, using these factors to manipulate him into believing that eliminating Sandra was the better option. Carol's true nature was revealed through her actions and words. She was a greedy woman who wanted Bob's money and was willing to go to extreme lengths to get it. She didn't care about the consequences or the people she hurt along the way. Detectives Martinez and Harris uncovered that Carol had been planning this for quite some time. She ensured Bob would be captivated by her beauty when they first met at a party. He then hired her as his personal trainer, and their affair began from that point. Bob and Carol would often secretly have sex in the house, behind Sandra's back, and would also meet out of town in various hotels for passionate encounters. During the investigation, the detectives uncovered more text messages and emails between Carol and Bob. These messages showed how Carol had slowly and methodically convinced Bob to commit the crime. Carol skillfully used her words and actions to manipulate Bob into believing that killing Sandra was the only way to secure their future happiness. She knew exactly how to push his buttons and exploit his weaknesses. She used flattery, promises, and fear to control him. Carol painted a picture of a perfect life together full of love and passion, free from the problems that Sandra's presence created. As the detectives pieced together the evidence, it became clear that Carol was the mastermind behind Sandra's murder. With enough evidence gathered, detectives Martinez and Harris were ready to make arrests. On March 20, 2022, the detectives arrested Bob for carrying out the murder under Carol's manipulation. They arrived at Bob Harper's office, a sleek real estate agency in downtown Savannah. Bob was in the middle of a meeting with clients when the detectives walked in. He looked up in shock as they approached him, showing their badges and informing him that he was under arrest for the murder of his wife Sandra Harper. Bob's reaction was one of utter panic. He stammered protests, insisting he was innocent and that there had been a mistake. His employees and clients watched in stunned silence as Bob was handcuffed and let out of the office. Detectives Martinez and Harris also arrested Carol, the true mastermind behind the entire scheme. Carol had cunningly used her sexual allure to manipulate Bob into murdering his wife. She believed she had complete control over him, so much so that she arrogantly dismissed any possibility of Bob breaking free from her influence and exposing her role in the crime. Her manipulation didn't stop with Bob. She had also ensnared Alan, convincing him to hack into Bob's bank accounts. Carol's confidence in her ability to manipulate men into doing her bidding was her downfall. She underestimated Bob's and Alan's potential to break free from her spell and reveal the truth to the authorities. Initially, Bob was reluctant to implicate Carol. However, the detectives cleverly revealed to him that Carol was also involved in a sexual relationship with Alan. And with Alan's help, she hacked into his bank accounts, planning to run away with his money. Realizing he had been manipulated by Carol, Bob was shaken by the gravity of his actions and eventually confessed everything to the detectives. including Carol's role in orchestrating the murder. Similarly, Alan, guilt-ridden and fearful of the consequences, disclosed how Carol had manipulated him into committing the cybercrime. Carol's arrogance and belief in her invincibility led to her capture. Her carefully constructed web of deceit unraveled as the detectives pieced together the testimonies of her former puppets, ultimately bringing her criminal activities to light. Her greed and ruthlessness had led to tragedy, and now she would face justice for her crimes. Detectives Martinez and Harris were also determined to bring Alan Wilson to justice. Although Alan claimed he did not know about the murder plot, he had illegally accessed Bob's financial records, aiding Carol's scheme. The detectives gathered the remaining evidence needed to secure a warrant for Alan's arrest. Alan was arrested for his role in the crime, even though he insisted he had no idea about the plan to kill Sandra. Sandra's family, while devastated by her loss, expressed a sense of relief that justice was being served. They had been in a state of anguish since Sandra's murder, and the news of Bob's arrest brought them some measure of closure. They were particularly shocked to learn about the involvement of Carol, a regular visitor to the Harper home. The community of Savannah watched closely as the case continued to unfold, shocked by the betrayal and manipulation at the heart of this tragic story. The detectives' relentless pursuit of the truth had paid off, and they were committed to ensuring that all those involved in Sandra's murder faced the consequences of their actions. As the legal process moved forward, the people of Savannah hoped for a fair and just outcome that would honor Sandra's memory. The trial for Sandra Harper's murder began on December 5, 2022, in Savannah, Georgia. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious locals. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Sarah Bennett, a determined and sharp 45-year-old lawyer known for her tough stance on crime. Bennett argued that Bob Harper, under Carol Morgan's manipulation, killed his wife to avoid a messy divorce that could ruin his career and social standing. Bennett presented compelling evidence, including incriminating emails between Bob and Carol, hotel footage of the two together, and phone records showing frequent communication. She contended that Bob, desperate to be with his girlfriend while preserving his career and lifestyle, committed the murder of his wife. The defense attorney, James Caldwell, was a 50-year-old lawyer known for his calm demeanor and skillful defense strategies. Caldwell argued that Bob was a victim of Carol's sexual manipulation, which drove him to kill his wife. He highlighted Bob's clean record and his cooperation with the police as proof that he was not a cold-blooded killer. As the trial progressed, emotional testimonies from Sandra's family members painted a vivid picture of the loss they had suffered. Her parents, James and Margaret Collins, spoke about their daughter's kindness, her dedication to teaching, and the impact of her death on their lives. The jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching a verdict. On December 7, 2022, Bob Harper was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Carol Morgan was also found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and received a 25-year prison sentence. Alan, who cooperated with the investigation, received a lesser sentence of 5-year imprisonment. Sandra's family expressed relief at the verdict but were also saddened by the whole ordeal. They felt justice had been served but knew that no punishment could bring Sandra back. The community of Savannah felt a mix of shock and closure, as the trial had revealed the dark depths of betrayal and manipulation behind the murder. After the trial, life for all involved began to change dramatically. Bob Harper's world had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. Bob started his life sentence in a Georgia state prison. He spent his days reflecting on his actions and the choices that led to his downfall. Once a respected real estate businessman, Bob's life had completely unraveled, and he became a cautionary tale about the consequences of falling for manipulative schemes. Bob felt deep remorse for killing his wife, Sandra. As he sat in his cell, the reality of his actions weighed heavily on him. He was haunted by the memory of what he had done, especially how he had tried to portray Sandra as an adulterous wife. Bob had posed her dead body to make it look like she had been unfaithful, but the truth was far from that. Sandra was a very good and kind person who had always been loyal and loving. Bob remembered the many ways Sandra had shown her kindness. She was always helping others, whether it was volunteering at the local shelter or simply being there for friends and family when they needed support. Sandra had a warm smile and a gentle heart, making everyone around her feel valued and loved. As he thought about their life together, Bob was filled with guilt and shame. Sandra had always been a faithful wife, and he had repaid her loyalty with betrayal. His affair with Carol and the subsequent murder were acts of utter selfishness and cowardice. Bob knew that Sandra deserved a loyal husband who would stand by her side. Instead, he allowed himself to be manipulated by Carol's lies and promises. The realization that Carol had used him hit him hard. She had manipulated him into committing the murder, knowing he would take the fall for his wife's death, leaving Carol free to abscond with money from his bank accounts, which she had accessed through Alan's computer skills. In his moments of reflection, Bob vowed to honor Sandra's memory by telling the truth and facing the consequences of his actions. It was a small step, but it was all he could do now to show his remorse and respect for the woman who had deserved so much better. Carol Morgan and Alan Wilson were sent to separate prisons to serve their prison sentences. Carol, once a beautiful personal trainer, struggled with the reality of prison life. Her once vibrant personality faded as she faced the consequences of her actions. Alan, the quiet computer specialist, retreated even further into himself, spending his time in prison libraries and avoiding other inmates as much as possible. Detectives Martinez and Harris continued their work in Savannah, receiving commendations for their thorough investigation and successful resolution of the case. The public praised their dedication and perseverance, and the case became a benchmark for future investigations in the area. Sandra's family tried to move forward, though the pain of their loss was ever present. Her parents, James and Margaret, found solace in their community and church, where they receive an outpouring of support. They started a scholarship fund in Sandra's name to help students pursuing a career in education, hoping to keep her memory alive through positive contributions to the community. The community of Savannah slowly returned to normal, but the memory of Sandra's murder lingered. The case of Sandra Harper's murder left a lasting impact on everyone involved. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life can change and the devastating effects of betrayal and manipulation. As time passed, the community worked to heal, always remembering the kind-hearted teacher who was taken too soon.